One of the biggest things I do when I talk about policing and the history of policing is I discuss race. I discuss the origins of policing within the United States. I talk about the Night's Watchman in the North, and I talk about the slave patrols in the South. My name is Dr. L, and today we're going to break down, what some lawyers have discussed and discovered, or at least their thoughts about why Black folks are continually targeted by police. So maybe a little bit different than that. What they're actually talking about is why white folks in general dislike Black people. But of course, as the slave patrols and the night watchmen and the origins of this country evolved, we understand that those folks were mostly white. But after slavery, right? So we get after slavery, what was the the animosity, the anger, the hatred, the vitriol all about? In 1877, from 1965 to 1877, we had what was called the Reconstruction era. After the Reconstruction era, we get the rise of the Klan, we get the rise of lynchings against Black folks, the rise of Jim Crow. Why did it happen? And this system persisted from 1877 until around about 1963. 1963, 64, 65, we get these amendments. uh, MLK is assassinated in 68, right? So it was actually really in 1968 that's when Generation X kind of sort of was born, and that those people, and I was born in that time period, not long after, in that time period, that we are the first generations of Black folks, Black men, Black people who are born with their full U.S. citizen rights. Why did it take that long after slavery? Well, we're going to try to these lawyers are going to try to explain that, and I want to try to explain that as well. All right, so I want to point out some books before we get started here. I'm going to review a YouTube video. I've watched about 5 minutes of it and I couldn't finish anymore, but I said, you know what, when I watch it again, I'm going to do this reaction to it. Okay, so here's what I want to point out, and a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. There has been some folks who have been so angry at Black people. White folks have been so angry at Black people. So, I mean, what was the lynchings about? What was the cutting off of the men's testicles? What was the cutting open of pregnant women's stomachs about? And then cutting them open. The fetus falls to the ground, and then stomping on them. What was tying them to the back of a pickup truck and then driving all over the place? What was all that about? What was the gator baits of Black babies about? Why would you do that? What have we done in the 19 a few years ago? Maybe it was about 20 years ago now. I read an article and I can't seem to find it ever since. But I thought it was by a guy whose name was Robert Ingersoll, but I can't find it, so you can't hold me to this. Anyway, what I think that he or some other orator of that time asked a question, and he was living in the 1890s or 1890s or so, going around the country giving speeches. Robert Ingersoll was. I'm pretty sure it was him. I'm like 90% sure, but I can't find it to verify it. He was going around the country talking about um, why do Black people, why do white people hate Black people so much? We've never kidnapped them, we never raped them, we never did all these things that we were accused of doing. We didn't want revenge. Even after slavery, right? We hired them, we owned businesses, we tried to reign justly. When we entered into politics, we tried to be just and do the right thing. We didn't hold any type of animosity. Why is it that this continues to haunt us? Even until today, I would argue till today, 2025, when we get the rise of Trumpism. And there's another video I can show concerning that. In fact, here it is. Here's a video I just watched today called Donald Trump is a racist. We need to call it out. Stuart Stevens Live. It's from the Lincoln Project, a very right wing or right side of the aisle type of format. So why? So it's not just me saying that. This is a white guy saying this, right? What is going on in 2025? We got ICE agents running around out here. We've got Proud Boys, all this type of stuff, right? And what is all this about? What was the MAGA movement really about, right? Where's the Tea Party after Barack Obama was elected. I mean, all this. This is all what we're going to try to discuss for today. So, as I started to talk about in the late 1960s, early 1970s, there was a group of Black psychiatrists who tried to understand this phenomenon that we're going to try to explore today, and they tried to understand it as a form of mental psychosis, or why would you hate a group of people that badly who didn't do anything to you? We didn't kidnap their daughters. We didn't kidnap their sons from England or from Europe and then bring them over here and enslave them. We didn't do anything like that. What is the hate and animosity about? So let's put up some screenshots here. This is from a guy's Carl C. Bell, MD. Racism, a symptom of narcissistic personality disorder. Now, none of these theories took hold, but of course, who was controlling the academic structure at that time, and who's controlling this, right? So you're not going to say, they weren't going to allow them to say that, okay, if you're a racist, then you have some type of narcissistic personality disorder. But think about what racism is. Racism, particularly white supremacism, is the fact that you are so special, you are so great, and you just have to hate everybody else. And no one faces more of that hatred than Black people, than Africans. We seem to be the exact opposite. If there's white, there's Black. We seem to be the exact opposite, the exact antithesis. And I'm not saying this, but this seems to be what they're pointing out. Why is it like this? What is the point of this, right? So he wrote that particular article. You can go look for this: Racism, Narcissism, and Integrity, right? Again, this is another article by Carl C. Bell, MD, right? Then we got this one: economic scarcity alters the perception of race. I've talked about this before, right? When uh, things start to go downhill as far as economics, Black people seem just a little bit blacker, right? It's absolute craziness. Let me see what else I got here. I think this one too. Uh, Point to counterpoint: is extreme racism and mental illness. You can pause this here, read it over, and you can do some research about this. This was a phenomenon that they were trying to understand why these people hate Black people so much. And to be sure, they hate they seem to have a disdain for Asians. They seem to have a disdain for those of the Americas, but man, that vitriol really comes for Black folks the most. Right? Here's another one, right? Racism and mental illness. Now, again, I'm saying that these people wrote these particular articles, and the articles never took hold, and never got into the DSM, and never got into that. Why is that? And even if it didn't get into there, how do we explain the alt right? How do we explain the Charlottesville situation that happened years ago under Trump one? Right? They're walking. You got people with tiki torches walking down the street talking about, you will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Who's trying to replace you? Right? Then we got the great replacement theory and all this other stuff, right? All this other stuff, like we could go on and on and on and on and talk about, that we all know, right? The Ku Klux Klan and all these different groups going around lynching people, right? So here's a couple of books that I really advise people to read, and there's so many that you could read, right? Go and read White Rage: The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson. This was a book that she wrote in 2016. Great read from my perception. Here's another great book I don't think that people gets talked about enough: From Jim Crow to Civil Rights: The Supreme Court in a Struggle for Racial Equality. So Carol Anderson, in this book, White Rage, talks about what was going on in the time period of 1877, up until the 1960s or so. And a great book, but she talks about the different stories of tragedy, people being swindled out of their homes, and the police force against them, and everybody was in on it. I've often talked about that. Not every single white person, of course, and don't misconstrue what I'm saying and trying to say that I'm trying to say all white people are racist. That's not the point. It's not all white people don't like Black people. Of course not. But there seems to be this virulent strain that goes through much of white communities against Black folks, and we just don't understand why. So read this particular book as she talks about it. But here's another book, right? Jim Crow to Civil Rights by Michael J. Klarman. In this book, he talks about not only the same things that Carol Anderson talks about, but he tries to go down through the academic judicial literature in his analysis and trying to understand why did the Supreme Court in 1954 in the Brown versus Board of Education, why was it such a drastic change? Because until that particular time, Black people had been losing much of the debate, much of the arguments, much of the judicial precedences concerning Jim Crow, right? 1896. I'm not a lawyer, but Plessy v. Ferguson was became the law of the land. And if you're going to segregate one thing, you can segregate everything. But as what Carol Anderson and even Michael Carmen allude to, it wasn't equal. I don't think there would have been a problem if the amenities were equal, right? School systems were all the same, but they weren't. So they had to take them to court. Black people just want the right to live and to exist and to be fair and treated equally. That's all they were asking for. So in 1954, the country begins to have this major shift. And Michael Klarman, even in the book, says there's really no reason for it. We can't put our finger on it because all these judges and justices throughout the whole country had been upholding white supremacy. Even if a Black man had sued a white man and could somehow prove that he was being taken advantage of, particularly in civil court, they would award him, yeah, okay, you won a case, but you're only going to get $1. Whereas everybody else was getting hundreds and or thousands of dollars for the same type of incidents. What caused the major change in 1954? Well, I think that we all understand that, and it was beginning of the television and where people were beginning to see across the world what the United States was doing. Remember, World War II, you had Black folks going overseas, fighting for freedom, right? Sacrificing their lives against the menace that was going on over there in the 1940s, 1930s, 1940s. Black folks give their life and they want to come back and enjoy the freedoms. But also at this time, we get the advent of the TV, and more people are starting to see and starting to hear, and newspapers are getting out that how the GIs were treated when they returned. Not only that, but they began to read these things, and you had an uproar within other African countries. Everyone wanted to cast off the ideas of racial dominance and colonialism. All that was beginning to fall. And as the TV was beginning to show, here's America, the light of the world, and all this other type of stuff, right? This city on the hill, this great country. We are the beacon of freedom. We are the hope of democracy. And here's how all people should live. But your Black people here are mistreated. They're held in bondage, peonage, debt slavery. They're held in all this. And the GIs who fought for their right to be free, you come home and treat them like garbage. After a while, and I believe that this is Michael Klarman's thesis, mine as well as many other scholars have said, this was the turning point, and so we can't continue to do this. Not long or in that time period, the military was desegregated. So enough of me rambling on here. We're gonna review a video here by a number of lawyers, and this is called share screen here. This is called replay why whites hate blacks generally. The Defiant Lawyers, pretty sizable channel. I'm going to claim fair use. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Again, I listened to this about 5 minutes of it. So I just want to get your thoughts and your opinions about this. And we're going to watch this. White America on Trial. Why do whites hate blacks generally? I'm going to give the analysis that I think that they hate them. And I think the best theory that I've read or heard or understood thus far concerning this matter is Frances Cress Welsing's The ISIS Papers. And for all you non-readers over here, you can go to PBS video, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Part 1, 1989. Dr. Frances Welsing discusses her theories on white supremacy with host Lizervelt Middleton. Let's see, in an interview with the host Listervelt Middleton, Washington, D.C., psychiatrist Dr. Frances Cress Welsing used a chessboard as a visual aid to illustrate her theories on white supremacy. Dr. Welsing argues that racism, specifically white supremacy, is a deliberate and subconscious strategy designed to ensure white genetic survival and prevent white genetic annihilation. So listen, This is not these are academics who are putting forth these particular types of theories. I don't particularly enjoy talking about this. So why am I talking about it, right? I thought this was a police channel. Now this is a channel to help us to understand why some of these things are going on. And if we don't, why were the police not upholding their morals, ethics, and values that they swore to do? Why was racism rampant through police departments? In fact, it was not only a bug of the bug, it was the feature. It was white racism was the feature in police departments. So let's get into it here. Here's a lawyer going to try to break this down. Again, shout out to these guys. What is the name of this? The the Defiant Lawyers. I had to remember the name of them. The Defiant Lawyers. All right, we're going to play this. Play this. Here we go.
So I use the word generally because I'm not speaking or asking this question from an individual perspective, because I'm not asserting, nor am I asking whether every white person hates blacks, but whites generally, whites holistically, whites as a whole, white society. Why does white society, why do whites hate blacks?
Again, let's pause here and let's be very accurate in what we're saying. We're not saying that a white person or many white people or all white people, but there seems to be this animus that runs through the country, and we're trying to figure that out as to why that is, particularly after the Reconstruction era ends in 1877. We get mass lynchings from that point until till about 1920s or so. There's something like 4 to 5 thousand. We don't even know how many. 4 to 5 thousand lynchings. Why? What was it? What was the hatred about? And let me put up some other stuff here. Well, and let me put this up here before we continue on with this here, because someone is going to say that this had to do with, blacks they were just a bunch of monsters committing a bunch of crimes and all this kind of stuff, right? But here we know that black folks were received the most exonerations for inappropriate behaviors by lawyers and judges, and they were just put behind bars for no reason, right? So the National Registry of Exonerations report high racial disparity in wrongful conviction. So why was that? Right? Why was that? What is up with that? So all these different lies. We now know that on her deathbed, the lady who accused Emmett Till of whistling at her, it didn't happen, right? Our land was stolen, right? How many lakes and rivers throughout the country, excuse me, lakes throughout the country were once settled black places of production and productivity, and cities, thriving cities and towns, at least towns, right? So listen, but why would you go in there and burn them down? And why did the police allow it? And why were judges getting, right? This is the white supremacy. This is the systemic problems that we're talking about, and the school system, right? So let's continue on with this brother's having to say. I'm assuming he's a lawyer himself.
Now, for those of you who will deny that it's true that whites generally hate blacks, the proof is in the pudding. There's no way to deny it. So hang around. I want to talk about that for a few minutes. True. I mean, it is true. We have exhibit after exhibit after exhibit after exhibit, and we're going to get into that. Let's have a serious dialogue. I want you to answer me in the comments as well. And again, the question is, why do whites hate blacks generally? That is the question that I'm asking. I'll give you time to think about it. And this is a question only for intellectually honest people, not trolls, but people who are ready and willing to have a serious dialogue on this question. It's a question I don't think America has ever asked. We've never had a serious dialogue about this. Again, why do whites hate blacks generally? Now, let's start with the definition of hate. What do I mean when I say hate? Hate, defined by Merriam-Webster definition, is an intense hostility and aversion, usually deriving from fear, anger, or sense of injury. So when I say hate, I'm using the Merriam-Webster dictionary's definition: an intense hostility and aversion, usually deriving from fear, anger, or sense of injury.
So remember what Francis Cress Welsing said, right? Fear of genetic annihilation, that one day they're not going to be either in the dominant society or they're going to disappear altogether. Let's get back to it.
It could also be extreme dislike or disgust, uh, antipathy, or loathing.
When you think about this, right? So again, when you really start to read some of these stories, right? So there was times when the children would crawl into the bed with their mammies, right? The black mothers or matriarchs or whatever. But then as soon as slavery ends, right? Now we're disgusting. Don't touch us. Now we stink. All this other type of stuff, right? Just like, where did this discuss antipathy and loathing start from, and how does it continue?
I mean, those are strong words, but they describe what we have seen coming from white people toward black folks generally over many, many, many years.
Now, I am going to take issue with this term generally, so don't get in the comments saying that this is general. I do think that it was general. It was generally that way because of state mandated um, sanctions, probably into the 1960s. So I guess we could quibble about what we mean by generally. What is that? The average, more is 70% of white folks, 50% of white folks. What does that mean? But certainly the biggest problem that I have is the system. So as we talk about the school system, the military, colleges, K through 12 education. I mean, they were so that when in Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, they were so mad at black folks having won that they said we're not going to educate any kids, and then they came up with all different type of secretive machinations to educate and to siphon away funds from public education to private institutions, just so they could educate white folks. Right? They would rather drain the swimming pool where than rather have black folks swim in a quote unquote white people's swimming pool. Where does that type of antipathy and loathing and disgust come from? How does it? We're trying to figure that out, right? I'm going to speed it up a little bit. His cadence is a little bit slow, so we're going to speed it up to 1.5 speed. Hopefully, this isn't too fast. You can always go over here and watch the original. I'm going to put it in here, but I want to get through this, and I don't. His cadence is a tad bit slow for me.
Where does this come from? What is it in white culture that brings about this type of hatred? If we can ever get an answer to this, have a serious discussion about this, maybe we can see how to deconstruct that hatred. So I'm raising the question. Again, please feel free. In fact, I encourage you, I want you to comment about this video. All right. Now, why whites hate blacks? So here's some reasons that I offer as a reason why whites hate blacks generally. Number one, a justification for greed. Now, I got to look to scripture on this because I'm a Christian. I'm an attorney, but I'm also a Christian. In fact, I'm a minister.
So his justification of greed would be the capitalistic system in society. While I agree that that is a definite motivating factor, the problem, and this probably could go back. I don't know what he's going to say. This is where I actually stopped. I had to turn it off. Because I was doing something, I couldn't listen to it. But I would agree with that concerning the capitalistic society and the way that they got folks to dive into this capitalistic society, and why it was okay to justify not only the eradication and first primary the enslaving of the indigenous of the natives, right, making them go into the mine, stealing their silver, etc. Right, so that was one form of racism. And then we get all these different edicts and bulls from the Catholic Church saying, yes, okay, it's okay to enslave black folks, right? And yes, before anyone gets in there, I know that they were treated the Irish as well in some type of racist craziness. But I think that we can agree now that once there was an establishment of white people in which Italians who were once not white, Eastern Europeans were not once not white, the Greeks were once, questionably white. Once you, and of course the Irish, once they all lumped them into one family as to whiteness, then they turned their attention to everyone else, blacks primarily. Then you get another level of hatred for the natives of this land, the Americas, and then of course to the Asians. So it's still exploring this.
So I got to go to the scripture for answers. I'm not going to look to psychologists or anthropologists or the such. I'm going to go to,
And that I think is a mistake. Again, he's claiming to be a Christian, and this is the part of the problem that a lot of Christians have to answer as to why these justifications that came from Scripture were in there, right? So, I mean, he's going to try to take us down this. Again, I haven't watched this, but I suggest you guys. So let's pay attention to this. But this is something that is going to be difficult for Christians to answer.
the source of creation. All right, God. And so in the Bible, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10 says what I believe is the number one reason why whites hate blacks. For the love of money is a root of all evil. It is through this craving that some have been led astray and have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves through with many acute mental pangs. So the first reason I believe whites hate blacks is to justify greed. If you believe the Bible, I certainly do. It's
Why? Okay, again, I started with all the diatribe about the capitalistic society and the elites. They could do that, but how do you get the middle class and lower class men who seem to hate black folks even more? They are the ones performing the lynchings. The middle and lower classes, they are the ones. And a lot of that is going to, he may get into this, but a lot of that had to do with slavery. And when slaves were emancipated, they were actually some of the most skilled people in America, right? They were the blacksmiths and shipbuilders and all these other things, right? They weren't just out there picking cotton. There were a lot of other skills and trades that they possessed. So therefore, when they became freed, they could undercut. You can pay a carpenter, let's just say a white carpenter, one wage, but you can undercut that and pay the black laborer another wage. Maybe he's going to get to this. I don't know. But that would cause the white carpenter to have more anger and anxiety. Could be a reason, right? We're thinking out loud here. So I want you guys to think about it as well. So I believe this is his greed argument, which I'm going to agree with.
It says the love of money is the root of all evils. Hatred is an evil. So the root of that hatred, according to scripture, is a love of money. And we can so clearly see that because there's one thing that blacks, Africans have that whites not only crave, but need. And that's all those natural resources on the continent of Africa. A lot of the continent of Europe does not have all of those resources and wealth. So Europeans saw all this wealth on the continent of Africa where African people derive from. And they, because of greed, because of a love of money, desired that. And then they justified it with hate and racism. In other words, we can take what these people got. We can take it because they are inferior, because they're less than human, because they are heathens, savages. So because they're less than human, because they're savages, because they're heathens, we can take from them. We can kill them. We can colonize them. We can enslave them. Because, this is the way God created things. This is the natural order of things. So it is not a violation of anything for us to take what they got, kill them in the process, and use it for our own personal benefit. So the first reason is a justification for greed. That's where a lot of the hatred comes from. Because again, scripture says the love of money is the root of all evil. So hate is an evil. What is the root of that hate? Greed, the love of money. What else? Satanic influence. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 gives us some insight here. It says, for we...
Well, this is why, I know he's not going to he's going to delve into the most of this from a spiritual sense. I'm going to disagree with that. Well, I don't want to address that. Not that I'm going to disagree, but I'm going to. This is why I went to what articles have been written and other folks, psychiatrists and medical doctors, well, those would be psychiatrists, tried to really understand this in the 70s, which is why Frances Cress Welsing wrote her work. And you can go over to that and read it, obviously, and you can go over to the video that I'm going to put up. I'm going to try to put the link in below. Is you can go over there and just listen to her articulate, why this is going on. We're trying to understand it. And so he's going to go to a spiritual sense, but academics have been trying to understand this for a long time. We got Stephen Miller in the White House, and why do you hate all these people, right?
Not wrestling with flesh and blood, contending only with physical opponents, in other words, humans, but against the despotisms, against the powers, against the master spirits who are the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spirit forces of wickedness in the heavenly supernatural sphere. So this tells us that the fight that we see between whites, blacks, and any other group actually is really coming about because of the influence of demonic forces in the unseen world. So demonic forces influence people to hate other people. So the fight that we African Americans and Africans around the world have with whites, it's really demonic forces that are behind this fight. It's really the.
So he brought up the point about, I'm going to address this here. He brought up the point about the resources in Africa, and that has been the demonization of everyone, and therefore demonization by other people to continue to exploit these people. Africa's underdeveloped. The people there are not that smart. IQ, intelligence, and all this other kind of garbage, right? Meanwhile, they have continually supplanted, continually. I had so many books here about that, the underdevelopment of Africa and the destruction of Black civilization, and all these other books, right, have all been written about that, trying to address what the sabotaging that is going on and continues to go on, through warfare, right? So Haiti, the country of Haiti, fights for their independence, and they are surrounded by French forces and forced to sign an agreement. Stating that if they don't pay reparations, that they'll be invaded again. In the United States, the foremost country in this land, still wrestling with slavery itself, refused to acknowledge them and refused to offer them aid, even though it's another country fighting from independence from an imperial power, just as the quote unquote forefathers did in this country in the Revolutionary War. Right? Complete hypocrisy. Why? Well, because they were enslaving black folks themselves. So
those demonic forces that brings about the hatred that whites have generally against blacks. Now, if you say that it's not true that whites generally hate blacks, just hang on. I'm gonna prove that whites generally hate blacks. So number one, it's a justification for greed. That's where the hate comes from, according to 1 Timothy 6:10. And it comes from satanic demonic influence, according to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. Where else? Twisted racist theology. Twisted racist theology. There are verses in the Bible that whites used way back in history to once again justify the hatred of black people, the oppression, the enslavement of black people. Twisted racist scriptures. Genesis chapter 9, verse 20 through 26. And Noah began to cultivate the ground, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and became drunk, and he was uncovered and lay naked in his tent. So at this time, there were only 8 people on the planet: Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 wives. This was after the great flood. So Noah, after this flood, essentially got intoxicated. And Ham, the father of Canaan, glanced at and saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brothers outside. So Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon the shoulders of both, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So let me explain. Again, there were only 8 people on the planet: Noah and his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 wives. Their 3 sons were Shem, Ham, Japheth. Ham is the progenitor of the black race. Shem is the progenitor of the Semitic people, the Jewish people. And
of course, he's speaking from a biblical context. I'm not sure that any archaeologist or anthropologist would agree with that, but this is his theological understanding.
Japheth is the progenitor of European people. All people on the planet descended from one of these 3 people. Shem, Ham, or Japheth. Blacks descended from, again, Ham, and specifically from Ham's son, Cush. So when Noah awakened from his drunkenness, he was angry with Ham for seeing him naked, and he cursed Ham's son, Canaan. Notice he didn't curse Cush. He cursed Canaan. And the African people in the African diaspora are descendants of Cush. We're Cushite people. So the curse was not pronounced on us. Yet, European people began to propagate the lie that the curse of Canaan covered all black people. And consequently, it was biblically acceptable to enslave, to oppress, to hate, and to treat black folks the way black folks have been treated for many years. All because of a twisted, racist interpretation of these scriptures. But once a lie is told and gets into the psyche of people, that lie is very difficult to break because, again, it just gets into the psyche of culture and is then propagated. And folks end up hating people based on some lie that was told, racist, twisted lie that was told many years ago, thousands of years ago. And you ask them, why do you hate this person? You don't even know this person. Why do you hate them? And they oftentimes, if they were being honest, would just say, well, that's what I was taught to do. That's what I heard my daddy say. That's what my granddaddy said. That's what my mother said. That's what I heard. That's what I seen. That was a part of my family. And they heard it and seen it from their family. And you go all the way back to this lie. Huge.
That I agree with. People don't know why. People don't know why they vote Democrat, don't know why they vote Republican. Sometimes people just don't do their homework about a lot of things. So, and I talk about this, I talk about the propagating of culture when I talk about police interactions, right? Because a police officer is going to do what they saw their supervisor do or allow what they saw their field training officer allow after they graduated from the academy. And that field training officer did what he was allowed to do, expected to do, and did what his field training officer told them. And you can go on and on and on and on back, field training to trainee, all the way back until around 1877, when we get the establishment of more formal police departments. Well, this is the way we're supposed to do things, and it's hard to get this out of the system now. We're doing a much better job. We got transparency. We've got a lot of civilian oversight boards. We've got a lot of trainings. We've got a lot of more interactions. So it's happening. But one of the biggest things we got to do is root it out of the culture, because it's difficult to take a police officer, 22, 23, 25, 30 years old, brand new police officer, and try to undo the things that his mother and father taught them along the way.
Huge lie, racist lie that has justified so much wrongdoing toward African American, the entire African diaspora. All right, what else? Let's keep looking. I'm offering you what are, again, the reasons that I identify for why whites generally hate black people. And then there's a fear of black people. A fear, because we read from Merriam-Webster's dictionary right here. Hate, defined by Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is an intense hostility and aversion, usually deriving from fear, anger, a sense of injury. So hate oftentimes is born out of fear. Fear. And so there's a fear of African people, fear that African people will rise up one day and seek vengeance. A fear that if the continent of Africa ever became free, then Europeans would not have this vast source of wealth to steal and pillage. And
well, we're seeing that now. There's more information coming out now concerning France going broke because they don't have access to these resources anymore, in particular from Burkina Faso. So this is he's taking a spiritual look at it, but there is some scientific data in other instances about talking about this. Europe is in trouble because they don't have their colonial subjects to extract wealth from, and that's the problem with all of capitalism. You have to extract wealth from someone. Excuse me. First, they try to extract it from the Irish. Then the natives of this land, and of course Africa, and it's all of its. This is what a lot of these wars are about. It's all about wars, right? I'm not going to go down that path, and I'm not going to turn this into international relations or history class. Well, maybe a little bit of a history class, but that's what a lot of these wars are about: making sure we have access to minerals, oils, etc.
And to take through colonialism. of fear. So we got to keep these people down. We got to keep oppressing these people. We got to keep these folks fighting one another. We got to keep these folks traumatized, because otherwise we fear that they will rise up and either take vengeance for all the stuff we've done to them, or they will just begin to start demanding that we treat them fairly. That's fear. So I offer to you a few reasons for this hatred. Again, they are a justification for greed, because we saw in the scripture that the love of money is the root of all evil. Satanic influence, because we see in scripture when two people are at war with each other, there is demonic, satanic influence in the unseen world that's bringing that about. Twisted racist theology, the twisting of the story of Noah and his 3 sons and grandsons. And last of all, fear. Fear of what would happen if the African American, the African person, the African continent, especially sub-Saharan Africa, is ever liberated, what that would do to Europe, the impact that that would have on the continent of Europe. Because again, this wealth that Europe has robbed from the continent of Africa for hundreds of years, even predating slavery. Before slavery began, before colonialism, Europe was taking advantage of Africa with all kinds of unfair trading. And then they just got the bright idea, instead of, unfair trading with the continent, with these black people, let's just take over the continent. And it was during the Conference of Berlin in 1883, 1884, that they decided to just carve the continent of Africa up and take it, and therefore take the resources. And so colonialism was eventually defeated, but a new form of colonialism began. And this is where Europeans began to use corrupt African leaders to continue robbing Africa through those corrupt leaders. We're seeing that now.
That's in the 40s, 50s,
Now,
and
I told you,
60s.
I was going to show you, prove to you, with solid proof, that whites generally, holistically, hate blacks for the 4 reasons that I gave you. What proof might I have? Well, number 1, colonialism. That's rooted in hatred. That's rooted in greed. The atrocities that the European people committed against African people, African nations, to colonize that continent is rooted in all those things that we said. Fear, hatred, greed, racist theology. But what else? Slavery. Slavery. 246 years of chattel slavery here in America. And chattel slavery is the worst type of slavery. It's where, under the law, a person is not even considered a person, but property with no rights whatsoever. None. Stripped of all humanity and decency. That is hatred. That's satanic. That's demonic. That's greed. That's fear. Lynchings, rapes. You see all of the mixed race African American people here. It is the result of the rapes, the child molestations that European people visited upon African people after they arrived here. I've been to the continent of Africa. I've been in Ghana at the point of no return, and was told the story of how the European slave traders would pick out the young women as they were entering that castle there, the point of no return, would pick them out for rape. And of course, the plantation owners, once they arrived to America, just completely had total, absolute control over young women, children often. Thomas Jefferson essentially was raping a black child. You're under the law. I'm an attorney. Under the law, you cannot say that a child consents to sexual relations. A child cannot consent. And I think her name was Sally Hemingway, I believe, 15, 16 years old. She couldn't consent to having sex with that grown man, Thomas Jefferson, and gave birth to multiple children. That's evil, hateful. Let's go deeper. I'm giving you proof. Jim Crow. After slavery was abolished, the 13th Amendment, which was, we celebrated actually the anniversary of the ratification of the 13th Amendment just 4 days ago, December 13th, 1865. So I think it was like 185 years ago. My math could be off. But after slavery was abolished, hateful whites created another system called Jim Crow. And the intent of Jim Crow was to basically keep black people in a state of de jure slavery, if you will. To keep black folks in a continued state of second-class citizenship.
He said it was just December 13th. I just want to see what date that was. What date this video was released was 8 days ago as I record this.
This is when the KKK was formed to terrorize blacks, to say essentially, despite the fact that the 13th Amendment has been added to the Constitution, the 14th, the 15th Amendments, we're still going to keep you in this place, relegated to second-class citizenship through Jim Crow laws, Black Code laws. This is hatred. This is hatred. This is greed. This is demonic and it's fear. I'm just giving you the facts. Segregation during Jim Crow, the separate but equal doctrine. Keep those people away from us. Keep those people away from us. Segregate those people. We don't.
So he said, I thought he said December 1st, 1865, but December 13th. Maybe he was a little mixed up, but I just Googled it. It was February 1st, February 1st, 1865.
Want those people mixing with our people. They're inferior. They are less than human. They're not on our biological level. Terrorism, again, through the KKK and other hate groups. Systemic racism that we contend with even today. How do we see it? We see it with mass incarceration.
All right, let me be very accurate here. So you can't always trust AI, right? So the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, abolition of slavery, passed by Congress July 31st, 1865, and ratified December 6th, 1865. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the U.S. So I don't know what that other thing was talking about. So you can't always don't listen to AI. Let me find another source here. Let me find another source here. This is the United States Senate. Jeez, I want to be accurate here. The 2012 film. Let me put this on the screen here. Add this. Remove this. Take this down. Add the screen. Add the screen. Share screen. Man, why is this so inaccurate here? This U.S. Senate, Senate.gov. The Senate passes the 13th Amendment. The 2012 film Lincoln told the story of Abraham Lincoln in the final month of the debate over the 13th Amendment, leading to its passage by the House of Representatives January 31st, 1865. What the film did not portray as a part of the history. All right, so okay, so this goes down through it here. So it looks like that the other date I read to you was correct. All right, we're going to get back to this. Sorry about that. I just want to be accurate. I don't want some historian saying I'm not doing my homework here. All right, so present screen, share screen. Here we go.
And don't you dare for a second come up with this stuff about, well, blacks commit most of the crime. That's why they are suffering from mass incarceration. Most of the crime in this country are committed by white people. And some data does show that blacks do commit some crimes disproportionately, but that's because of the trauma that we've dealt with in this nation. No other.
And by the way, there are crimes that are committed disproportionately by whites. I'm pretty sure rape is one of them. I'm not going to go look that up. I'm pretty sure rape is the one they commit. Are blacks disproportionately involved in homicides? Yes. Are white people disproportionately involved in rapes? I'm pretty sure the answer to that is yes.
Group of people in America has been traumatized, like African Americans, with the lone exception of Native Americans. And even they are treated better than African Americans. There's not anything that we can do as blacks to overcome the fact that we are black. As Chief Justice Roger Taney said in the Dred Scott decision, these people from Africa have no rights that we whites are obligated to respect. Because
okay, we're going to pause there for a second here. While we're talking about this situation going on in, when we talk about this situation, let's discuss how racism works. And he's talking about segregation, Jim Crow, and all this type of stuff. So let's look at what's going on in 2025 here. And we'll get back to that in a second here.
I hired a pair of young white men and a pair of young black men. And for each pair, I hired a pair of young white men and a pair of young black men. And for each pair, I randomly assigned one individual in the pair a criminal record. What this means is none of the young men in the study who were posing as job applicants actually had criminal records in real life. But for the purposes of these applications, they communicated to employers that they had a felony conviction. So looking first at the outcomes for white testers, we see that about 34% of whites with no criminal record received a callback or job offer, compared to just 17% of whites with a criminal record. So we see that criminal record reduces employment opportunities by about 50%. In the case of Black testers, 14% of those with no criminal background received a callback or job offer, relative to just 5% of Blacks with a criminal record. A Black applicant with no criminal background received callbacks or job offers at about half the rate of an equally qualified white applicant. But the most surprising finding was really related to Blacks with no criminal background relative to whites with a felony conviction. We find that a white applicant with a felony conviction fared just as well, if not better, relative to a Black applicant with a clean record. This suggests that being Black in America today is essentially like having a felony conviction in terms of one's chances of finding employment.
All right, so I wanted to play that. I do apologize. I really wish that people wouldn't add that stupid music in the background, but I just want to show you what is going on today. And this study has been talked about a lot of times, right? So this hinders Black economic progress, et cetera, et cetera. We'll finish this out here. No more interruptions. Let's get through it.
Because they are Black. Other groups came to America and could assimilate and basically become white. The Irish, the Italian, the Jewish people, but not as Blacks. We will always be Black in their eyes. We couldn't come in and get the privileged status of being white like these other groups. We're white, we're other, we're different. We are an insular group, and we are stamped with the badges and incidents of slavery and Blackness. Mass incarceration, wealth disparities. Don't get me to talking about how whites have 10 times the wealth that the average Black family has. Healthcare disparities.
Another book you guys got to read. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Another book that I really suggest you all read. It talks about people coming here. Back of the Hiring Line. Back of the Hiring Line, a 200-year history of immigration surges, employer bias, and depression of Black wealth. Put that on your reading list, right? So you can understand what is going on and what has happened to African-American people who tried to move up the economic success ladder.
Don't get me to talking about how Black folks receive an inferior level of health care in hospitals and doctors' offices and medical insurance and so on. Education disparities, just disparities throughout these various systems, which evidences, which proves hatred, white hatred. At every turn in this country, we have been met with pure white hatred. When Barack Obama was elected and then reelected for the president of this country, the hatred that man and his family dealt with was almost otherworldly.
Now let's unpack this for a moment here, because somebody can say, well, there's white people that helped to vote him into office. There are many white folks who don't see race, or who may vote, even if they do see race, they may even still vote for their economic and political expediency and agreement that Barack Obama was putting forth, but they still may not have liked a Black man in the office. Who knows? But they at least cast a ballot for him. However, I want to talk about the backlash as Carol Anderson said, white rage at economic success. Look at what has happened since then. We got Trump, we got the Tea Party, we had the Charlottesville, we got all this kind of crazy stuff going on. Right now, we have this administration right now, Trump 2.0, has wanted to reinstall some torn down statues of military generals for the Confederacy. Forget the racial aspect of it. These people were traitors. Crazy.
Donald Trump for 6 years said he wasn't even a legitimate American. Mitch McConnell said his number one goal in life, in the proudest moment of his many years in Congress, was working to ensure Obama's failure. And he specifically singled out the fact that he was able to keep Obama from putting Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. Said it was his mission, his goal in life, to see that Obama was a failed president. Well, he wasn't. He was not.
Think of how crazy that is. Because if he fails as a president, then then doesn't the country fail? I mean, think about the vitriol, think about the hatred, think about the racism, think about the ideology, think about all that. How can you want this man to fail? Listen, I'm not a Trump fan, but I want him to do well. I want him to exceed my expectations. And right now he's not. Crazy. I want all Americans to do well. But why is it that some people don't want us to do well? That's the question we're asking.
Tell you who was Donald Trump, who only came to prominence and became the president of this country because of white backlash for the election and re-election of Donald Trump. Trump became president because white Americans, because of this hatred, wanted to put somebody in office who could help them prevent a black takeover of this country. I'm just speaking facts, pure facts. The proof is in the pudding. Why do whites hate blacks? Generally, not every single white. There were whites doing slavery who fought to abolish slavery. There were whites doing Jim Crow who died during the Civil War to end slavery and oppression. Not every single white person hates black people. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you look at white culture, white traditions, white morals, white institutions, you see a consistent and deep hatred. All the Confederate monuments in this country, thousands of them, all to suggest this is our country. You will never be a true citizen in this country. Change the laws all you want. But in the heart and soul of white society, you are black, you're second class, we hate you, and we always will. Just the facts. Just the facts. I hope we can overcome it. I'm very doubtful. As a man of faith, I believe that it's going to take the Lord himself. Because again, for those reasons that I gave you, it's hard to overcome that level of hate for those reasons. Here they are again, just to remind you. Justification for greed. I mean, all the wealth that whites have amassed from the resources that blacks own or the work that blacks have done, whites are not willing to give up that wealth and admit that they created racism to justify this greed. And anyone who talks as I do here is labeled a Marxist, is labeled racist, race baiting.
When he says created racism, it's not that they created racism, because there's been tribalism and people have often hated, disliked, not cared for, chosen their own people above others. But there's been a certain vitriolic establishment, systemic establishment. This is the modus operandi. And it's not a bug of the United States. It's in the very documents and DNA and history of the establishment of this country. It runs through the proverbial veins of this country, and we don't know why. Not that we don't know, and we're not even saying we care. We just want this. We just want the fair shake. We just want the fair shake. So this is his analysis. We're finishing off.
To hold on to that wealth, satanic influence, twisted racist ideology, and fear of man. If I wasn't a man of faith, it would almost feel hopeless. But I am a man of faith, and I know that God is a God of righteousness and justice. Psalm 89:14. And we're here in the Christmas season, and some of my favorite verses of the Bible we see oftentimes on Christmas cards. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 and 7 talks about a son has been given, a child has been born, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and he shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Prince of Peace. And in the seat of David, he's coming to rule the nations, to establish a kingdom of both righteousness and justice.
He is saying that he's at Christmas time. So I'm recording this in September. So he released this 8 days ago. So I'm assuming that's probably why his little misspeaking in about December. So, well, actually it wasn't a misstatement. So so that's curious. Anyway, we'll continue on.
Righteousness meaning equity, meaning fairness, meaning no discrimination, no racism, but a place where everybody is somebody. That's what Jesus is coming. So even if we don't achieve it in this age, there's a new age coming. There's a new order coming. There's a new world order coming. And I'm not talking about some antichrist stuff. I'm talking about the promise, again, from Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. Jesus is coming to establish a new world order based on both righteousness and justice. All right. This is a lawyer channel, YouTube channel, but I realized I ended up just preaching a little bit. That's fine. That's fine, because again, I'm both a lawyer and a preacher. And the law is oftentimes based, at least the ideal of the law oftentimes is based in Scripture. All right.
So I appreciate this brother doing that. So I may check out a few of his other thumbnails here and videos. First time I'm seeing this brother. Thank you so much for doing that. It does say replay on here, which I'm catching again. It does say replay, so I just caught that. So I appreciate this. I put my analysis on it. I agree with much of what he said without the spirituality behind it. I think that the Francis Cress Welsing and other psychiatrists have tried to analyze this, and they just can't seem to get anything as far as academically gain any type of traction. But I agree with their analysis that there's a fear of white genetic annihilation. I think that there's a capitalistic aspect to it, which he talked about as far as the finances. And then once you got finances, you got to justify the rape and pillage and the emasculation that has gone on, and so therefore you get it passed down through generations. And here we are today in 2025, still talking about this. So it's an issue, and he talked about this as a lawyer's channel, and this is a police channel, and I want to help to give an understanding as to why Black folks have often suffered at the hands of the police and what we can do about it. And what you could do and should do about it is call it out. Don't align with people who are racist, who have these ideologies. Question yourself about, are you really afraid of Black folks? I'm not talking about in a criminal sense, but are you afraid that they're going to overtake you? If you're a white person watching this, are you afraid that they're going to overtake you, rape your children? I mean, what does that mean if they're going to overtake you? What does that mean? What is the idea behind that? I mean, you're not going to be able to get a job. You think that they're going to treat you the way that you treat other people? Black folks have never done that. They've never done it. There's this idea now, speaking of racism, and I'm no international relations scholar, but I have heard other international relations scholars talk about the rise of China and why Europe is so afraid of that. Well, for 500 years, you can go over to watch some Jeffrey Sachs videos. For 500 years, the Europeans have been in the dominant position. Now they see a rise in China, grouping with India, grouping with the Russians, and Europe and their offspring seem to have an issue with this. Well, it's because they have been telling lies for 500 years that people who are not European are somehow slower and can't do it, are inadequate, and this, that, and the other. Well, they're proving their point. They're proving that it's not the point, proving it's not the case. And soon we're going to see the rise of Africa too, once all the full chains have been unleashed. And once we get some education in there, we're going to see the rise of Africa as well. So let me know your thoughts and your opinions. Hit me in the comments section. Like the video. Thank you so much. Much love and peace.